Anita.
Good day, everyone. My name is Nadita Ramachala. I'd like to welcome all the participants to today's stakeholder consultation on the draft national standards for labeling of goods. I would like to officially start today's proceedings by introducing our acting executive director, Mr. Rodney Ramnath, to deliver welcome and opening remarks. Rodney is our acting executive director. His substantive post is a manager of the certification division at TTBS. He holds an MSc degree in project management and a BSc degree in industrial engineering, both from the University of the West Indies. He's also registered as a principal quality management systems auditor by the International Register of Certified Auditors. He is well versed in quality infrastructure and its mechanisms, and it is my pleasure to turn the session over to Rodney to do his welcome. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Nadita, let me just do a quick mic check. Are you hearing me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thanks very much. And again, good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to address the participants at today's stakeholder consultation. At today's session, we will be discussing two draft national compulsory standards for labeling of goods, which are intended to replace the current standards. The first is TTCS 19, Labeling of Goods, General Compulsory Requirements, which is intended to replace TTS 76, Requirements for Labeling, Part 1, General Principles. And the second is TTCS 20, Labeling of Goods, Prepackaged Goods, Compulsory Requirements, which is intended to replace TTS 76, Requirements for Labeling, Part 2, Labeling of Prepackaged Goods. The Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, or TTBS for short, is mandated by the Standards Act, Act number 18 of 1997, to develop, maintain, and promote standards for the improvement of goods produced or used in Trinidad and Tobago to ensure industrial efficiency and development, to promote public and industrial welfare, health, and safety, and for the protection of the environment. Standards can be of two types, voluntary or compulsory. Voluntary standards are meant for industrial guidance and can generally be used at their discretion. However, compulsory standards require mandatory compliance, and these are enforced by TTBS under the mandate and authority given to us by the Standards Act. Enforcement is done mainly through two routes, either inspection by the Implementation Division or product certification by the Certification Division. Compulsory standards may be developed to ensure acceptable quality in products for home use and where there is a restriction in the choice of supply, protect the environment, protect the consumer or user against danger to health or safety, protect public or industrial health, welfare, or safety, require adequate information to be given to the consumer or user, and prevent fraud or misrepresentation arising from misleading advertising or labeling. Several of these, which I just mentioned, particularly the last four, would apply to the draft national compulsory standards for labeling, which are being discussed today. We would like to highlight that this is the second stakeholder consultation held for these standards. The first was held in November of 2021. The development of compulsory labeling standards plays a key role with us fulfilling our mandate to ensure consumer protection. Product labels provide crucial information and instructions to consumers, and the label is an essential communication mechanism between the producer and the consumer. When purchasing consumer products, evaluating the product label is typically an important step in the buyer's decision-making process, and it also helps customers to retain information on the product and use the product correctly following the purchase. These draft national standards had their genesis in two CARICOM regional standards, which were spearheaded by the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, or CROSQ for short, namely CRS 55, Labeling of Goods, Part 1, General Requirements, and CRS 55, Labeling of Goods, Part 2, Specific Requirements for Prepackaged Goods. An important aspect of TTBS's standards development work is participation in regional standards projects, as well as adoption of regional standards issued by CrossQ. Once standards are approved as CARICOM regional standards, the intent is that these CARICOM standards become national standards in the various member states, since one of the key mandates of CrossQ is to harmonize standards and to facilitate regional trade. The CrossQ Act under Article 11, Adoption of Standards and Procedures, states where the Council endorses a recommendation pursuant to paragraph 1, Standards and Technical Regulations for Adoption, and commends it to quoted for approval, the states parties shall, upon approval of quoted, adopt appropriate legal and administrative arrangements to give effect to the decision of quoted within their respective jurisdictions. When these regional standards were being developed, during the regional public comment stage, TTBS held a stakeholder consultation to solicit comments, and numerous comments were submitted to CrossQ from Trinidad and Tobago via the TTBS as the representative for Trinidad and Tobago at CrossQ. Once the regional standards were completed, TTBS started the adoption process for the regional standards. However, we recognize that there was a need for more product-specific labeling requirements for the local market, and also to specify the requirements for compliance, as this would facilitate enforcement by TTBS via our implementation division. Therefore, we are now ready and prepared to adopt these regional standards with national deviations to support CrossQ's mandate for harmonization. As such, and as indicated before, the draft compulsory standards, once declared, will replace the current national compulsory labeling standards, which are currently being enforced by the implementation division. At today's session, we will hear from Ms. Nadita Ramachala, who is the manager of the standardization division, and who will give us a brief introduction into the national standardization process. Then we will hear from Ms. Nikeshi Williams, who is also a part of the standardization team, and who will highlight some of the key requirements of the two standards. She will also highlight some of the critical comments received from the first consultation and the proposals to address the concerns raised by stakeholders in order to finalize these draft compulsory standards. Then we will have a presentation from Ms. Sherian Ramnarain of the Implementation Division, who will be providing an overview of the enforcement activity for labeling of goods. Finally, stakeholders will have an opportunity to ask their questions, highlight their concerns, or request for clarifications on certain aspects of the draft standards. It is important that you, the participants, voice any concerns before the finalization of the draft standards. We need your input to ensure that the final standards are practical, relevant, and implementable in order to ensure that the main objective of protecting consumers and our society is realized. In closing, I encourage all participants to actively participate into these discussions. I wish you all a very productive session. Thank you for your attention. Back to you, Nadita.
Thank you, Rodney, for giving us that overview of today's session. As you indicated, this is our second session on these two very important compulsory standards for labeling of goods. I will take 1 minute to share my screen. So I will be doing a presentation giving an overview of our standards development process. Okay, so I will go straight into my presentation. So TTBS, and I'm sure many of you all present today would be familiar with the operations of TTBS. So I will be doing a quick recap. So TTBS is a national standards body, and we operate under the Standards Act number 18 of 1997. We also have some key rules, including the National Quality Certifying Body, the National Laboratory Accreditation Body. And under our Metrology Act number 18 of 2004, we are the National Measurement Institute. Some key policies and strategies that TTBS would follow would be the National Quality Policy, which really sets the framework for what we consider the national quality infrastructure in our country. And for the standardization aspect of TTBS's work, we have a national standardization strategy. I encourage all the participants to take a look at these documents, which are available on our TTBS website. The vision and mission of the TTBS. We have this very futuristic vision to be the essential provider of national quality solutions, leading to a standards-conscious society that is globally competitive. This directly fits into the framework for our national quality policy as one of the premier institutes in the country responsible for quality infrastructure. Our mission is to champion the development and implementation of standards, measurement systems, and conformity assessment services for the competitiveness and sustainability of Trinidad and Tobago. The TTBS has several different functions, as I would have indicated before. We have several key functions, including standardization, and at today's session, we will hear some more about our compulsory standards, specifically for labeling of goods, but we also participate in regional and international standardization activities. Under our metrology division, we're responsible for industrial, scientific, and legal metrology. For our implementation division, they are a key conformity assessment division at the TTBS, conducting inspections at ports and businesses and within the market itself. And this is primarily to ensure compliance to our compulsory standards. The certification division covers a number of different areas: management system standards, product certification, tourism services, and they offer both voluntary and regulatory conformity assessment services. And to support our enforcement of standards and to support the overall functioning of businesses in the country, we have a number of laboratory services in our division, comprising chemical labs, electrical labs, fiber, mechanical labs, etc. I would just briefly recap our standards-related mandate as outlined in our Standards Act number 18 of 1997. TTBS is responsible for the promotion and also encouraging the development and maintenance of standards. And we generally develop standards that serve different objectives, such as to improve the quality of goods produced or used in the country, to ensure industrial efficiency and development, to promote public and industrial welfare, health, and safety, and also for the protection of the environment. To further this objective of the TTBS and to fulfill our mandate, we have to participate at different levels of standardization. At the international level, you may be familiar with the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. There's also a sister body, the IEC, International Electrotechnical Commission, dealing primarily with standardization of electrical products and systems and services. At the regional level, we have the Pan American Standards Commission, and this is abbreviated as COPANT. We also participate very actively in regional standardization, and this is for the CARICOM region, so CROSQ, or the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. So you'll see that there's a particular hierarchy for standardization, and it is important that we participate in these developmental initiatives, both at the regional and international level, to ensure that we as Trinidad and Tobago can contribute to the development of regional or international standards. So today we'll hear quite a lot about our labeling standards, but again, just to reinforce, what is a standard? It is essentially a technical document that provides an agreed upon repeatable way of doing something. So standards could take several forms. They can be specifications, it can be a code of practice, it can even be a test method. We have a number of standards that provide guidance or guidelines for the operation of a business or service, and they provide a commonly accepted and repeatable way of defining the objective or the technical requirements of the products, and this would include both a physical good and service. Standards are primarily used to foster trade, protect public health and safety, preserve the environment, promote innovation, and very importantly, contribute to the fulfillment of our UN Sustainable Development Goals. Why standards? So I think whether we recognize it or not, standards form a part of our daily life. Anything grown, produced, and traded is subject to standards. I wanted to highlight this very important slide in terms of the types of standards we develop at the TTBS. So today we are here to discuss two compulsory draft standards, and I will deal with this first. This is where we can have an impact on health, safety of users or the environment, or if there's a consumer issue that we need to address. And this is essentially the regulatory side of the TTBS's operations. So requirements in a compulsory standard are legally enforceable by the TTBS. I would have mentioned two primary conformity assessment activities that we would conduct. This would be the inspection service as well as certification. And these activities demonstrate that products comply with the requirements of the standard. It may also be supported by testing, which can be done either at the TTBS's laboratories or via recognized laboratories outside of the country. And very importantly, our compulsory standards are given that status by the Minister of Trade and Industry. So effectively, our compulsory standards are pieces of legislation. They can be termed technical regulations, and that is the international terminology under the World Trade Organization. So we have to comply with the requirements of the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, which was signed on by TTBS. We also have voluntary standards, and you may be very familiar with ISO 9000 dealing with quality management. There's 14001 dealing with environmental management. We also have voluntary standards for business continuity, governance, etc. And these voluntary standards represent the minimum levels of acceptability for a product or service. They can be adopted at the discretion of business, and they're also market-driven. There is a third category that I would also like to mention. Regulators and ministries can utilize voluntary standards to support their regulatory framework, thereby making the requirements of a voluntary standard essentially mandatory. A key example of that would be the electrical wiring code, which is for the TTBS a voluntary standard, but it is actively enforced via the Government Electrical Inspectorate Division under the Ministry of Public Utilities. So all electrical installations would need to comply with the electrical wiring code, and therefore the requirements are mandatory. I would like to turn now to the standards development process, and we generally follow these basic steps in developing standards. I indicated earlier that we have a national standardization strategy. This essentially outlines our key areas of standardization over a 3-year period, and it is broken down into annual plans. So first, we get from stakeholders what are their priority needs for standardization. So it could be related to health and safety, protection of the environment, to improve product quality, to improve a service that is being offered. So there are a variety of needs that a standard can serve. Once the need is identified, we would conduct technical and market research, prepare a working draft, establish a committee to help in drafting the standard, and then issue the standard for public comment. So we would have gone through an extensive public comment stage for this particular labeling set of standards. So we have two standards that we are here to discuss. We would conduct stakeholder engagements like this to get direct feedback from the industry and stakeholders. And we would review these comments and determine what would be the most appropriate way to address the concerns raised by stakeholders. For this particular session, my colleague, Ms. Nikeshi Williams, she will be highlighting the TTBS's position and comments that we would have received earlier in the process. We had a previous stakeholder consultation, and we also received a number of comments from stakeholders, and we'd like to provide an update on those issues. After we have resolved the comments, and this is where TTBS would have the final determination in how the comments are addressed, the standard is submitted to a subcommittee of our TTBS Board of Directors. They are called the Technical and Marketing Committee. They would review and then advise our Board of Directors in terms of the approval of the standard. Our board is responsible for the declaration, and this is the final approval for the compulsory standards, as I indicated earlier. the Minister of Trade and Industry would confer that compulsory status, and then we would publish our national standards. Our compulsory standards are now freely available on our standards web store. So the majority of our newer standards are freely downloadable. And I encourage you all to take a look at our web store as well. And just to recap again, our national standardization strategy, it is our prioritized listing of standards to be developed, and we would have collected a lot of data, statistical data related to GDP, export potential, any issues where there was a particular social impact, looked at policy documents and government initiatives, as well as consult with key stakeholders to determine what would be our priority standards for that 3-year period. This document is available on our website, and it is aligned to an international methodology which was issued by the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO. There are some key steps that we would have followed, so I encourage everyone to take a look at that. And we appreciate any feedback in terms of any standardization needs that you may have, so that we can take a look at it as we move into our next cycle of the National Standardization Strategy, or NSS. We have some emerging areas of standardization. There has been a lot of discussion on sustainability, complying to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and how do we protect the environment, minimize the effects of climate change. In that regard, we have been focused in terms of some of our international standardization activities in areas such as governance, climate change. One addition that I would also like to highlight is net zero, circular economy, innovation, e-commerce, sustainable building materials, etc. So we also try to keep abreast of what are the international trends in standardization, so that we can prepare our stakeholders, public, private sector, for the future of standardization and what are the new initiatives on the horizon. So that is the end of my brief presentation. I will stop sharing now. And in terms of how we move forward, I will introduce you to Ms. Nkechi Williams, and she will do an overview of the standards as well as summarize some of the key comments raised. And in terms of the ground rules, I would just like to reinforce, please keep your microphones muted. Cameras should be off. We will have an open session in terms of comments, and we will ask that you raise your hand if you have any comments at that time. And the session, well, as you know, is being recorded. So it is my pleasure to turn you over to Ms. Nkechi Williams. She is a standards officer in the Standardization Division at TTBS with over 13 years of experience. She has been responsible for the development and revision of standards in a number of areas, including tourism, quality, consumer goods, labeling, as well as ICT. And she has a thorough working knowledge of national, regional, and international standardization. So it is my pleasure to turn you over to Nkechi to take us through the requirements of the standards, as well as summarize those key points that we wanted to raise to your attention today. So thank you, everyone.
Hi, thank you, Nadita, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. As Nadita said, I'm Nkechi Williams. So let's start with the overview of TTCS 19, which is the standard for requirements of labeling part 1, general principles. So this slide actually gives a little history of the labeling standards. So currently, as would have been mentioned, we have 2 standards that are currently being enforced by the TTBS. That's TTS 76 Part 1, that's a 2006 standard. And then we have TTBS 76 Part 2, 1997, which is the labeling of prepackaged goods. It would have been mentioned before that these standards are revisions of standards that were developed in 1994 and 1976. So regionally, there are actually 2 standards regionally, which is the CRS 51 and CRS 52, and those are 2016 standards. And these standards actually are revisions of older CARICOM community standards. So now, as CTBS is in the process of revising our standards to 2022 version, we are actually looking at the regional standard and basing our revised standard, our updated draft on the regional. So Nadita would have mentioned that these standards are compulsory, right? Compulsory meaning that these standards would be enforced. So if we look at the draft, right, in terms of what is the intent of the draft standards are intended to be used by a wide range of stakeholders. And on the presentation, you would see we have manufacturers, importers, distributors, retailers, wholesalers, purchasers, consumers. The main document used to formulate the standard, as I mentioned, was the Regional 51-1. But to develop that standard, that regional standard, they actually looked at Trinidad and Tobago national standard. They looked at Barbados national standards. They looked at Jamaica, and they also looked at the US Food and Drug document, right? So the regional standard was actually a compilation of all 4 drafts presented here. In terms of the content of TTCS 19, this is what our table of contents look at. So it's very similar to all standards. We have the scope, the terms and definition, requirements, but with compulsory standards, we include clauses such as conflict for other standards and laws of Trinidad and Tobago. We look at the mechanism to demonstrate compliance, and we look at measures related to non-compliance. So the scope of this standard. This standard establishes general labeling requirements for goods. It applies to all goods which are sold, distributed, and used in Trinidad and Tobago. This standard does not apply to goods or classes of goods for which labeling requirements have been prescribed in national regulations issued by other government ministries and agencies. So that is goods or classes of goods such as food, drugs, cosmetics, and devices. And when we say devices here, we mean medical devices. And 2, goods or classes of goods for pesticides and toxic chemicals. Another exclusion is goods or classes of goods for which specific label requirements have been prescribed in the compulsory national standard. So for example, CFLs and LED lamps, there's a specific labeling standard for this type of product, which is TTCS 11/2021. What this requirement or what this exclusion says is that once there is a product that falls under this standard, this is what will be applied. And then the last exclusion, we have goods or classes of goods for agricultural produce. So in terms of terms and definition, I just highlighted 2 here. So we looked at goods and we looked at the label. So for good, any commodity, article, product, or thing. And for the definition for label, we have any tag, ticket, brand, mark, pictorial, or other descriptive matter written, printed, stenciled, marked, embossed, impressed on, accompanied, or attached to a container. So clause 3 looks at the requirements of the label. Some of the general requirements under 3.1 says a label shall provide a description of the good and adequate information to enable a potential purchaser or user to select the good best suited to their needs. The label shall provide a purchaser or user with appropriate instructions for use. This can include storage, handling, installation, maintenance, where necessary, of course. And then it shall state the name, address, and the electronic or telephone contact of the manufacturer or the organization responsible for the sale. Be legible and durable up to the point of sale. It shall be in a minimum type size equal to or greater than 1.2 millimeter, where only uppercase letters are used, but in a minimum type size equal to or greater than 0.9 millimeter when mixed upper and lower cast letters are used. The height of the type shall be determined by measuring the height of the lowercase O or X or its equivalent. So we have prevention or deception. A claim shall not be made on the label unless it can be substantiated. A good shall not be described or prescribed in a manner that is false, misleading, or deceptive. The language to be used on the label shall be English, and the responsibility, when we look at the responsibility of a labeling of the good, the responsibility of any person who manufactures, sell, or distribute any good to ensure that they are labeled or required by the standard. So labeling of goods that are not new. When goods are not new, they shall be clearly and conspicuously labeled with the following terms as appropriate: second-hand or used, defective, second, irregular, imperfect. So when we talk about second-hand or used, we talk about goods or parts of goods that have been in service and that are re-entering a market for sale, lease, or use by a second user or an end user. Defective means containing one or more defect. And second, irregular, imperfect is goods which are not fully satisfied. Goods which do not, fully satisfy the specific requirements for the particular good, have defects or is incomplete, but which still fulfills intended usage requirement. And then we look at rebuilt, reconditioned, refurbished, manufactured, or reowned. And in the standard, we define it as goods which have been overhauled, repaired, refitted, or have undergone a similar process to be made reusable to meet the applicable technical standards or regulatory requirements, with the results of making it a fully functional good to be used for a purpose that is at least the one for which it was originally intended. So these goods shall fulfill additional safety and performance requirements outlined in specific good standards where applicable before it is sold or distributed in Trinidad and Tobago. Conflict with other standards and the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. The labeling requirements of any product-specific compulsory national standard shall take precedence over this standard. The requirements of any labeling standards for the specific goods or categories of goods shall take precedence over this standard. So for example, a product-specific compulsory national standard is TTCS 1 2018, and that's the standard for liquid chlorine bleach. So if the labeling requirements in TTS 1 standard conflicts with this draft standard, then the TTS 1 requirements takes precedent. Because, of course, that's a product-specific compulsory national standard. So that is what will apply for liquid chlorine bleach. So in terms of mechanism to demonstrate compliance, new goods shall comply with the requirements outlined in the standard. TTBS may consider and accept information from other sources, such as third-party testing, product certification, and/or quality management system certification from an accredited body. TTPS reserves the right to sample and test for compliance to the standard. Goods categorized other than new. Goods categorized other than new shall be subject to sampling and testing for compliance to this standard at the expense of the manufacturer, importer, or distributor. Goods categorized as second-hand, the TTPS reserves the right to sample, inspect, and test all goods on a 100% basis for compliance to the standard at the expense of the local manufacturer, importer, or distributor. Measures related to non-compliance. Where importers of locally manufactured goods are found to be in breach, TTPS shall initiate any of the following actions. Direct that the non-conforming good be removed. seize and detain non-conforming goods, prohibit the sale and distribution of non-conforming goods, permit modifications necessary for compliance, and direct the manufacturer, importer, and distributor to initiate a good recall. So now if we look at TTCS 20, labeling of goods for prepackaged goods, the compulsory requirements. This is a compulsory standard as well. The intent is the same, right? In terms of what was the main document used, we looked at we used the CRS 55.2, and those standards, and that standard was based on our national standard, a Canadian standard, a Jamaican standard, and the US FDA. The table of contents is generally same. We have the scope, but this one we have a normative reference. We have the terms and definition, we have requirements, and we have the same conflicts and the mechanism for demonstration and measures for non-compliance. So in terms of the scope, this standard specifies requirements for the information to be included on the label of goods prepackaged for sale, distribution, and use in Trinidad and Tobago, the method of display of such information, and where necessary, the wording and unit of measure to be used. So in terms of the exemptions are the same as would have been previously mentioned. Classes of goods or goods for food, drugs, and cosmetics, pesticides and toxic chemicals, agricultural produce, right? But for this standard, we have some additional exceptions. Goods intended for export only, goods that are sold unpackaged or in an open or uncovered package, goods that are weighed, measured, or counted in the presence of the purchaser with or without being packaged, gift wrap goods, and marking on shipping containers. So for prepackaged goods, we have to ensure that you fulfill the requirements of the general standard, that is the TTS 19, and this standard in order to be compliant. So let me just repeat that again. For prepackaged goods, you have to ensure that you fulfill the requirements of the general standard, which is TTCS 19, and this requirements in this standard in order to be compliant. So that is what we mean when we say it's a normative reference. So two important terms that I highlighted here was the term package and prepackaged good. So for package, we have any container, wrapper, confinement band, or card in which any good is to be sold, distributed, or used. For prepackaged goods, goods that are placed in the final package before sale and are sold, used, or purchased without further repackaging. Some of the requirements in this standard: each package of prepackaged goods shall be labeled in accordance with TTCS 19 and requirements of this standard. Information required shall be placed on the principal display panel of the package. A label on the package of the prepackaged goods shall not give any erroneous impression of the good. The format for date marking shall be stated in a format which is unambiguous and acceptable to TTBS. Requirements continued, so no reference shall be made on a label or on a package to any warranty or guarantee of any good unless a copy of the warranty or guarantee is given to the purchaser or user at the time of possession of the good. Instruction for the use or care in handling shall be included on the label or accompanying document as necessary to ensure correct utilization of the good. So in terms of the other clauses, we have clause 5, 6, and 7, which are the same as before, right? The conflict, the mechanism, and measures related to non-compliance. So I won't worry to go through that. In terms of the public engagement, right, we would have had three newspapers advertisement placed in the local newspapers. We would have had some sort of promotion done on the TCBS website and our social media platforms. We would have notified TWTO, and as mentioned, we had, well, this being our second stakeholder consultation, we would have had one previously in November of 2021. So let's look at some of the stakeholder comments received. So what I will do is read out the section of the standard that it applies to, and then I would read the stakeholder comment. So let's look at PCTTCS 19, right? Clause 3(1)(c)(2) says, the name and address of the organization shall be preceded by the words manufactured by, packaged by, distributed by, imported by, as applicable. The comment received says, in US labeling regulations, the preceding text manufactured by would not be declared for products targeted in the US population, but sold in Trinidad and Tobago. So in terms of TTBS response, right, during our discussions, we sought to put some sort of flexibility to this. So we would have allowed to have some flexibility as it relates to the preceding text. So we propose to include the following phrase to the requirement: words expressing similar intent. So that means that if you don't have manufactured by, packaged by, distributed by, or if you have something similar to that, that will be accepted, right? Once it expressing similar intent. In terms of if anybody present, if you'll see any issues or you'll have any comments on what is presented now is the opportunity. So what we would like to do is allow persons the opportunity at this point briefly to state whether or not they see any issues with the current or as in the proposed requirement that is projected, or if anyone agrees or have any further comment on what we would have received or what we are proposing, right? So I'll just like to introduce Nadita back. She would be managing that part. If persons would like to chime in, you all could raise your hand up. I would pause briefly at the end. You all could put your hand up and we will give you an opportunity to make your comment, or you can put some feedback in the chat and we will continue. So.
Thank you, Nakeshi. So we would look at any questions in the chat. So there's already a question, but I will answer that in the chat in a minute. We'd like to raise the opportunity for you to provide any feedback on the specific requirements. So if there are any questions or concerns, yes, Mr. Rustant, you can go ahead, so you can unmute.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the stakeholders' comment clearly. What are they saying? That products manufactured in Trinidad but intended for export to the US is not falling under this labeling standard, and it would be required by US labeling regulations?
No, well, my interpretation of the comment is what they're saying is that if they purchase, this is on, I assumed is an importer who would have placed this comment, meaning that if they import a product from the US, right, The US labeling regulations do not mandate them to say manufactured, like say manufactured by A&E company, which is what our local standard asks you to do. So they are asking that if they import a product from the US, of course, the US products would be labeled according to US regulations. So that would not be included on the label. So their comment is if we could then look at probably not having those.
Yeah, well, this is why this comment was a little confusing to me, because I don't think I've ever seen a product coming out of the US that doesn't have that on their labeling. Sorry, I may be wrong, but I would have thought that is part of their regulations. You always see who the manufacturer is and which state, which city, contact information. So this is why what's being said here was a little confusing, and I was asking for some clarification. I'm not quite sure what it is the stakeholder is saying here.
Sure. So
if I may add to that conversation, it's I don't know, I didn't put my hand up, Ramon O'Brien from Unilever. We import a lot of American products from our sister company in the US, and it doesn't state manufactured by or made by. Generally, what it would state, and I take a classic example is maybe one of our personal care products. It would just say Unilever, Inglewood, New Jersey, and it might give an address, and that's it. It doesn't say manufactured by Unilever or manufactured in the USA. It would just state Inglewood, New Jersey, and maybe a PO box, and that's it. So there's no made by or manufactured by.
Okay, so in other words, the prefixes of manufactured by, packaged by is understood.
Exactly, because it's a product that's sold for the US, but of course it can be exported, and we do import it into Trinidad and sell it on demand.
Right. Understood. I understand now. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. O'Brien. So I guess that's why this comment was made. So in your in terms of in your scenario, in your experience, you're saying that it does not have any of the prefixes. So therefore, you are supporting the comment that was proposed by the stakeholder. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. So let me move. Any other comments before I move on? Of course, you'll have an opportunity at the end, because we have an open session at the end, if you'll want to further ask questions or questions outside of some of the comments made here, right? But we just wanted to have some quick discussions as we are going through one by one.
So Nikeshi, before we go to the next slide, I wanted to address the comment from Katie. Good day, will requirements for labeling of agricultural produce or products be outlined in this session? And my response to that is that we are also working on some grading standards for different types of agricultural produce, and labeling requirements will be included there. So we will be doing similar sessions in terms of agricultural produce later on in this calendar year. So you'll be invited to that session. And just to raise the comment from Diana, can you explain or elaborate on the mechanisms to demonstrate the conformance, testing, cost sampling process? We will get to that in one of the later slides. So you can hold on that and we will attend to that question in another slide. So Nikesh, you could proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next comment actually looks at the same clause 3.1C2. So this is another part of the requirement. It says the name or the country of origin, which shall be stated with the following words as appropriate. So this requirement is saying that you shall have the name of the country of origin with these preceding words: made in, and of course they have the name of the territory, product of, packaged in, manufactured in, assembled in. So stakeholder comment says the standard should allow for instances where the country of origin is not declared as stated in 3.1C2, but is included in the address declared on the label. So we partially accepted this comment, right? So allowance would be granted if the manufacturer includes the country of origin in the address. So the new proposed wording we're looking at including is where the manufacturer of the product includes the country of origin in the declared address, items 1 to 5 are not applicable, right? So for example, if you have a product that says manufactured by A&E, Johnson Road, Guyana, right? Then it is clear that the country of origin is Guyana because it clearly states that it's manufactured by, and they have the country name, I mean the company name and the address, which includes the country of origin, right? We were also looking at including the phrase words expressing similar intent, right? So that if you don't have made in, product of, packaging, manufactured in, or assembled in, you have something similar, right? We would allow that for once it's clear that where the country of origin is. So I'm sure we'll probably have some feedback on that. I think Mr. O'Brien kind of mentioned that a little bit just now. Anybody have a comment? I'll just pause for a little while.
So Nikeshi, no hands up as yet. So if you want to raise an issue, please raise your hand.
Can I just jump in here? Good afternoon. My name is Shandell O'Neill. I'm a sustainable energy specialist, also worked in manufacturing in different contexts and that kind of stuff. I'm a proponent for transparency. Came from pharmaceuticals. More information we need as possible. That's straight up as much information as possible on the label. Thank you.
Thank you, Shandell. We appreciate that comment.
Okay. Just to ask a quick question, because just now when Mr. O'Brien made his contribution, he said that sometimes the address would have, I think he said Inglewood, but I didn't hear him mention anything about the countries. It's saying USA. So is that to say that the label?
No, actually, it would. I'm actually trying to find an example of an artwork to share that would basically so forgive me, sir, I will come back into the meeting. I will just kind of like look for it and let's share it with the team so that we can have a clear understanding of what we're talking about.
Okay, so you have no issue at this point in time with this requirement?
I guess because this requirement applies to like the home care side of the business, whereas the personal care and the food side of the business is where my issue really lies. But of course, that is under another agency in terms of the country of origin and that statement. So,
okay. Okay, thank you.
Nikeshi, you can unmute.
Sorry, yes. So let's look at the next comment. This comment relates to clause 3.1C3, an electronic or telephone contact of the manufacturer or the organization responsible for the sale and distribution of the product in the country. So the stakeholder comment. Labels on imported goods would not have the electronic or telephone contact of the manufacturer or the organization responsible for the sale and distribution of the product in the receiving country, Trinidad and Tobago. However, such labels often have a relevant contact number, email address declared. So anybody sees any issue with the requirement as presented, or does anyone support the comment that was submitted. So in terms of TTBS response, right, TTBS understands why an electronic or telephone contact would be necessary, because we do look out for the needs of our consumers, and consumers need to have a way to file a complaint with either the manufacturer or the organization responsible for the product. So in our opinion, we see why this requirement would be necessary. But does anyone have any comment or have an issue with having an electronic or telephone contact on the label? Whether it be a website, an email?
I'll jump in and say it's fair, but I think one of the issues we run into is the maintenance of like the electronic website or whatever. But I think once it comes into our borders, we have to take responsibility as, you know, we're protecting consumers and have some means of, you know, traceability. So I support having something locally to help consumers, but we need to have the mechanisms around the place to support it, including the internet, the ready updates, the MSDs, all that kind of stuff, to make sure it keeps on getting updated. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we can move on to the next comment. So this comment looks at clause 5.1.2. TTBS may consider and accept information from other sources such as third-party testing, product certification, and/or quality management system certification from an accredited body. The stakeholder comment says, suggestion that TTBS considers sampling and testing to comply with this standard at the premises or upon importation. So this comment was partially accepted, and an additional clause section was actually included to speak to the TTBS conformity assessment activities, such as inspection, certification, and testing, right? So the inclusion would read, TTBS shall verify compliance to this standard, and goods under the scope of this standard shall be subject to a mandatory conformity assessment program administered by the TTBS through inspection, testing, certification, or any combination of these activities. So the provision of a third-party testing or certification would still be a consideration under the standard for manufacturers and importers where they see appropriate, right? But the first mechanism is the inspection, testing, certification, or a combination of these activities. Any comments on this?
Yes, raise the standard. Let's check it when it comes in and make sure we get any good stuff. Let's not start taking nonsense. We know we're developing, but let's make sure and check it. We have the resources. We could take oil and gas. Let's put it into making sure at least we get any good stuff coming in, please. Thank you.
Agreed. Okay, so we could move to the next comment. 5.1.4, clause 5.1.4. TTBS reserves the right to sample and test for compliance to this standard at the expense of the local manufacturer, importer, or distributor, including wholesalers or retailers where applicable. So the comment says, all market surveillance related costs should be borne by the TTBS. And then the second comment says, all imported goods should be appraised by the TTBS for compliance prior to being imported. So in terms of the first comment, right, our response is that the TTBS conducts their conformity assessment activities on products before they enter the local market. Therefore, this is not considered market surveillance. TTBS can request samples and test goods as part of the process for approval at the expense of the manufacturer, importer, distributor, etc. Right? So this requirement within the standard speaks to part of our conformity assessment activities. And let me just finish the comment before we take feedback. In terms of comment 2, right, which says all imported goods should be appraised by the TTBS for compliance prior to being imported. TTBS offers the service of pre-approving labels for products at a cost to the manufacturer, importer, or distributor. So anyone can contact the implementation division to seek approval for a label to ensure compliance to these standards. So that is a service that we currently offer. If anyone would like to seek approval before they decide to label. Okay, so in terms of comments or feedback.
We have Mr. Rostand. So Mr. Rostand, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I'm partially in favor of the stakeholders' comment, and this is why. While we are very concerned with the protection of the environment and the consumer, it cannot be done at the expense of the rights of the business or the business person. So I am thinking that if a person is looking to import a good and has all the necessary documentation to support the quality of the item being imported, and has presented that to the Bureau of Standards, if the person has presented all of that and the Bureau still wants to conduct their own testing, I think it should be done initially at the expense of the Bureau. If the Bureau, upon testing the goods, finds that the goods are not compliant to the supporting documentation, with the supporting documentation that was supplied to them, and in fact it is of inferior quality, then by all means the importer, the charge for the testing can be transferred back to the importer. But if the importer has complied with the supply of all documentation, I don't see why, if the Bureau chooses to still go ahead and test and finds that yes, everything is in compliance and everything is good, that cost should be borne by the importer. And then, of course, if the importer is unable to supply any documentation to substantiate the quality of the goods he's looking to import, by all means, he should pay for the testing requested by the TTBS. So that's on point number 1. And can I ask if right now any goods coming into the country or wanting to be imported into the country, is it standard procedure for the importer to provide documentation and apply for an import permit or not? Or at least with certain classes of goods, is it compulsory to apply for an import permit through the TTBS?
So thank you for those comments, Mr. Rostand. We are taking note of them. In terms of the latter part, in terms of the import permit, TTBS has the inspection process, which is well documented. And also for local manufacturers, we have been moving to the use of mandatory product certification. So we have taken note of the comments, and this goes to the fundamental essence of why TTBS was established. And I don't think we can give you a full answer at this point, but the current process that we have now involves an inspection fee if the product is imported. And also, if sampling and testing is required, then someone has to bear the cost. And what TTBS has been utilizing now would be the powers under the Standards Act, where that cost is borne by the importer or the manufacturer or the distributor. Now, I want to make a key difference in terms of other regulatory bodies which are set up where they have different systems in place. And the model being used by TTBS is one that is supported by our Standards Act, because you may find in other regulatory bodies, their models are different and their intent is different. So at this point, the position of the TTBS and its board and its line ministry is one where the sampling and testing would have to be borne by the party that is responsible for putting the product on the market. And such a shift would require a lot more discussion in terms of how we are set up as the TTBS.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but my point is a very simple one. And you have to appreciate that there are importers of various sizes. And while a large corporation can afford those testing costs and spread it out over the volume of product they're going to be selling, with a small importer, having to bear those testing costs may really be prohibitive. And my point simply is, if I have provided all the documentation to show that my product is of a acceptable standard, and the TTBS still insists that testing has to be done, that cost should be borne by the TTBS. Now, if upon testing my product proves to not be compliant and in line with the documentation that I provided, and my product is actually, that documentation was false or misleading, and my product is below par standard, right, then by all means the cost should be shifted to me and I should have to pay for it. But it is hard to impose those costs on a small importer when it really may be unnecessary to do so. And this is all of this is for the protection of consumers. You have to understand the importer is also a consumer, and these things, I just personally feel that while you want to ensure safety, it can't be at the expense of the rights of the business of the importer. So
thank you, Mr. Rusland. I think your comments are well noted. As you know, and maybe some of the stakeholders would also need to be updated, we are currently engaged in the revision of the Standards Act and Metrology Act, and similar concerns have been expressed at that level as well. So for the TTBS is something that we will take a look at, but in terms of finalizing this particular standard, it would involve a substantial change in philosophy, and that is something that we would pick up in the revision of the Standards Act and Metrology Act, because we do understand the points, and the whole issue of market surveillance is one that you have to decide on what type of model should be utilized. And we note the issues regarding the size and the scale of a company, importer, distributor, manufacturer, but that also has to be balanced against the risk, so that the risk assessment associated with the product is one that is also significant. And our intent is not to be more onerous than is necessary in terms of our enforcement activities. But your point is well noted, and we will discuss that at the management level within TTBS. So Mr. Rodney Ramnath is also here, our acting executive director. But I wanted to turn over to Chandel.
Yeah, Mike, coming back to that, I'm sorry, I'm a proponent of testing, I'm a proponent of compliance. It just comes with my territory at this point. So at least with small manufacturers, small enterprises, I'm at least advocate for co-ops or like some kind of like unions or like small subgroups, at least there's still some kind of regulation in small groups, because if we want to have like national, international markets, you have to show that it's compliant in all these ways, and it's easier to do it from the beginning and have it as like best practices and everybody understand it. And when you want to start to scale up, you're suddenly shocked by all these things they're supposed to be doing all along the way. So I would say, at least with smaller enterprises and stuff, we could look into like co-ops or something to help them to be, compliant, even if it can't bear the cost, but at least they're getting ready, they're pre-ready, they're ready to scale up if needed, if they want to, because they know how to be compliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Shandell, for that comment. And you make a valuable point as well, because part of the international trading system would be first compliance with national requirements and then taking the product outward. So I invite Rodney Ramnath, our acting ED, to also weigh in on this very important consideration.
Thanks, Lisa. I think that the point that is being raised is an important point. And under the framework of the quality infrastructure, there is a system that is intended to deal with that, and it's called accreditation. So when an organization is accredited to test something, that means that when that test goes to another country, the regulator can look at that test and accept it without having to test again. But we also have a lot of labs that are not accredited for their tests. So when documents come into TTBS, as far as I understand, and I wish the manager of the implementation division was here. Is Max here or not? But perhaps Sherry can give a perspective. But as far as I'm aware, when the documentation comes in, what the inspectors will do is they will first check to see if that test, that report that is being provided, that it comes from a legitimate source. Number one, they would check to see whether it is an actual lab that exists and they can find information about it. And then number two, if that lab is accredited, and that will give them the confidence to accept that test report. In certain cases, however, where they find information from a test report that looks a little bit sketchy, it's not really a formal word, but if it looks sketchy, then they will tend to flag that product and they will talk to the importer first to determine if they could get more information on the product. And really and truly, if we can't get any other information, that's when we tend to test again, to do our own tests on the product. And that's usually how it works. I don't know, Sherry, if you are there, if you want to add a perspective from the implementation division.
Well, I would speak.
Rodney.
That is true. That is true. You said it correctly. We have encountered situations like that, and that is exactly what we have done.
Yeah. So I do understand the comment being raised, but it's something that we will have to treat on a case-by-case basis. And usually once the information that accompanies the product is legitimate and we could verify that, usually TTBS does not have to perform a second test. But I think it's a good comment that is being raised. And again, what we would say is that the quality infrastructure has a system to deal with that, and it's the system of accreditation. So if it comes with a product certification or an accredited test, then that could be accepted. And usually it's accepted.
Thank you, Rodney and Risa. We have a comment from the chat. Will testing on premises, I guess, be one option to give us approval that packaging complies with the regulation? Does it have an expiration date? So I'm assuming Carol is speaking about the approval that is contingent on testing. Carol, do you want to unmute and raise your query directly? Okay, so I'm not seeing any microphones being opened. in terms of the approvals that are given, it is based on the particular batch. In some cases, if the product is certified, then that is also for a specific period, right? So Risa, do you want to go into any details in terms of the inspection? Because we will be getting to Sherry-Ann's presentation a little later on.
I know
Yes.
Sherry-Ann went into a lot of details, so I'll let Sherry-Ann speak and we could answer the
Okay.
question after.
Okay, great. So we will defer that until Sherry-Ann completes. And we have another question. I guess she's asking about the process from Casey. Will the process be similar to the one used by Export TT to approve exports? And the response in general, Casey, we will get an overview of the inspection process from Ms. Cherry-Ann Ramnarine. It is a different process. So TTBS has a mandate under the Standards Act, and we have a number of compulsory standards. The approval process for exports, it is a different process. So Nkechi, I would like to ask you to continue. So let us see if we can conclude your presentation, move directly to Cherry.
Yes, because in the interest of time, we have 4 more comments. So on clause 6.1c, permit modification necessary for compliance where possible. So your stakeholder comment says further clarification is needed as to qualify situations where modifications may be permitted. All available options should be clearly stated. So in terms of the TTBS, so this section deals with if your label is found to be in breach of any requirements, TTBS allows the manufacturer or importer to modify the label, right? So this is usually done on a case-by-case basis, and it's the conformity assessment division of the TTBS that will make that determination at the point in time. So it's not feasible for us to detail what modifications would be acceptable because, as I said, it's done on a case-by-case basis. So we would not, we thought it would not have been a good idea to include that within the standard, right? So I'm not too sure if anybody has any comments on that. So we just have a general statement within the standard that says modifications are allowed, basically. Well, all right.
I will jump in here and say sometimes people, you give them an inch to take a mile, and it's just like, it's something to check. Like if you're ordering 1,000 labels and they put a typo in it, this is something that's a further problem in your company that you maybe need to look into and like due diligence and not paying attention to detail. So it's a little sketchy because I can't say who, I'm not gonna name names, but people spray painting over labels, all kind of random stuff just to save a few bucks. It's just a little sketchy sometimes. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's why that determination is made on a case-by-case basis, what modifications would be allowed. So thanks for that. So let's look at the next comment. It relates to the standard. So now we're looking at TTCS 20, which is the prepackaged, right? So these comments would apply to the prepackaged standard only. So the section 421, the clause 421, the information required by 412A, which is the common or usual name, and C, the name, address, contact of the manufacturer, importer, or organization responsible, and the country of origin shall be placed on the principal display panel of the package. So the stakeholder comment says information regarding the manufacturer, importer, etc. is normally placed on the back panel of the product. The principal display panel is usually has the brand name and the common name, right? So based on our findings and our discussions, we would have accepted that comment, right? So we would be changing we propose to change the standard to reflect that A, the common and usual name, and B, the trade or brand name is placed on the principal display panel. However, we will also be including, right, an additional requirement, which is actually based on our metrology regulation, chapter 8206, section 5, which is here, which says the seller shall ensure that all prepackaged goods bear a declaration of the net quantity of the good on the principal display panel. So along with the common or usual name and the trade or brand name on the principal display panel, we would be adding the net content of the package. So now what are we proposing is that 3 items be placed on the principal display panel. Common or usual name, the brand name, and the net content of the package. Any feedback there? If not, then I'll move on to 482, which says the format of the date marking shall be stated in a form which is unambiguous and acceptable to TTBS. So we within the standard, within the draft, we would have had acceptable examples and unacceptable examples. So here are the unacceptable examples, and the stakeholder said that item 2 and 3 limits the industry and needs to be deleted. 2 digits for the year in 2 and 3 are worldwide accepted in standards like Cotex. Cotex states where only numbers are declared or used to declare the date, or where the year is expressed as only 2 digits, the competent authority should determine whether to require the sequence of the date, month, year be given by appropriate abbreviations accompany the date mark. So they're saying like DDMM YYY or YYDDMM, right? So in terms of TTBS response, so we partially did not accept this comment because we felt that items 2 and 3 are on those 2 examples, right, can be confusing and misleading to customers, right? And we further suggest, right, that if a manufacturer wants to use the 2 digits, then the abbreviation must, well, not must, shall accompany the date marking. So if you do want to use, for example, item 2, 01-0508, then you must, or you shall have on your label the DDMMYY, which are the abbreviations that explain the date marking, right? Any feedback there?
Support formatting matters. There's a big difference between 1 year and 7 years, and it can be read differently. And since we get information from like the US and Europe, we have to get different things in different formats. So yes, they demand their clarification to the best of our ability, please, and thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so this is the last comment, and it's on clause 4.10.3. The label shall highlight separate from the ingredients list any of the ingredients or manufacturing conditions which are likely to cause any adverse allergic reaction to users. So the comment is supply a list of ingredients classified as allergenic. So in terms of our response, we believe that is the manufacturer to make that determination in terms of what ingredients in your product that can cause an adverse allergic reaction, and it's not up to the regulator, meaning TTBS, to decide on that. So that comment was not accepted. And that's the end of the outline of the comments that we received in terms of the major comments. I see that we have a hand up, and if probably we could hear quickly so that we can move on to the next section.
So Mr. Rostand, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I actually wanted to make a comment about a prior clause 4.1.2e that speaks to disclosure of all the ingredients in the product in declining order. Now, and it is connected with this one that we are looking at here, because I am very much in agreement with declaring any ingredients in a product that may have allergic effects or long-term health effects, whether it be carcinogenic, etc. That should be clearly disclosed on the label. However, to ask someone to list all the ingredients or components in their product, especially in declining order, so you know, someone who is looking at it from an analytical point of view would have a pretty good idea of the composition of the formula. I think that is a breach of the people's intellectual property. A person may have a proprietary formula, one that is a trade secret. And I'll just draw an example that, you know, may not be point on applicable to all categories because it is a food item. But you think you could tell Angostura to disclose all the ingredients in their bitters? No, that's a trade secret. And while it may be compulsory to disclose all the ingredients in your formula to the authority like TTBS for their assessment as to whether it's safe for sale to the consumers or not, that's a totally different matter. And in disclosing to the TTBS, there will be confidentiality, there will be non-disclosure. But when you disclose all your product ingredients to the general public, you're asking me to give away my intellectual property, and I think that's wrong. However, if my formula does contain any known allergens or carcinogens, or yes, I should be compulsory that I disclose that users know what it is they're buying. And that's not just with food stuff. I mean, there are components like that in certain glues, epoxies, you know, spray paints or varnishes, whatever. And yes, so that's important, but not for me to disclose all my ingredients and in a declining order of content, you know, proportion. No, I think that's very wrong. So I think that needs to be reconsidered. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Ruston, could you just call out the clause number again?
Is it 4.1.2e? Sorry, let me just run back up and see. All right. Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Right.
Okay, so I think we can stop here. All other comments, if we could probably take at the end of the session, you all could continue putting it in the chat. Let's quickly move on to Ms. Ramnaray's session. I'll close.
Thank you, Nikeshi.
Thank you.
So we thank all the participants for the questions raised, and we will move quickly to the next presenter, Ms. Cherian Ramnarayan. So I'll just do a quick overview of Cherian's bio. She's an Inspector 1 Implementation Division at TTBS for the last 22 years, and she has worked across the Bureau in different departments. And she has also worked in the Implementation Division in its various units over time with a BSc in Occupational Safety and Health. So Cherian, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so We will discuss the enforcement activities for these two standards that you've been hearing about all afternoon. The labeling of goods general compulsory requirements and the labeling of goods prepackaged goods compulsory requirements.
Sorry to interrupt. At the end of this, are we going to go back to, because we've basically run through all the points, the clauses that you all already had responses to or recommendations on. But I did have some that we did not go through at all. So is there going to be a portion at the end of this where we can look back at some of those clauses?
Yes, Mr. Rustan. So
Okay.
right after Cherian's presentation, she's going to give us a quick overview of the inspection process, and then we will take your comments right after, as well as any comments raised. I already have a comment that came in from Diana Correa, so I'd raise that right after Cherian, and we'll go into the open session.
Okay.
In addition to that, that's the point of the US. I found an example, and that's to share with the participants so that they understand what the person might be speaking about. If you allow us to share that, allow me to share that. I guess it's like when you get to that part.
Mr. O'Brien, we could do that in the open session, and I'll allow you to be co-host to share your screen. So let us go quickly to Cherian's presentation in the interest of. Cherian, you can go ahead.
Hi, Cherian. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I was having a little bit of technical difficulty here. Right. So we're going to discuss the powers of the TTBS as legislated in the Standards Act, the powers of the inspectors, the terms and conditions of inspection, and the inspections and market surveillance activities. Okay, I seem to have trouble here. Just hold on.
Okay, so probably in the interest of time, since Cherian hi, Cherian, do you want me to present for you? I could present for you. I could pull up your presentation and I could present for you.
Right on the presentation. Okay. Nikeshi, let's see if I could get through now with it.
Okay, sure.
So the powers of the TTBS as legislated in the Standards Act, Clause 23(2) speaks to manufactured goods, and it says where a compulsory standard is declared in order to protect the consumer or user against danger to health or safety, and goods fail to conform to the required standard, such goods may neither be exported nor released for home use, but shall be disposed of as the Bureau may reasonably decide. I want to mention here that home use in this context means use in Trinidad and Tobago. Nikeshi, I have problems when I need to change the slide, so maybe you might have to pull up the presentation and change the slides for me because they're not changing.
Sure. Okay. So we are here now.
Thank you very much.
Right, so you just
So
tell me
clause
next.
24.5, yeah, clause 24.5, which speaks to imported goods, says where there is a reason to believe that goods imported or about to be imported are likely to be a danger to the health or safety of consumers or likely to threaten the environment, whether a standard exists for such goods or not, the Bureau may require the importer or vendor to submit such goods for testing, and the goods may only be entered for home use or sold if, continue Nikeshi. A, upon examination of the goods, they are found to be safe, and B, the importer or vendor shows proof satisfactory to the Bureau that the goods are safe. Next slide, Nikeshi. Right, so the powers of the inspector now. Some of you in the meeting today would be aware of inspectors coming to your compound. Some of the powers that these inspectors carry by way of the Act are: they prevent the access to the market of goods likely to be a danger to the health and safety of consumers. They can request to enter any place where they have reasonable grounds to believe any article covered by the Act is manufactured, prepared, stored, or offered for sale, and to examine such articles. Next, open and examine any receptacle or package that they have reasonable grounds to believe contains any article to which the Act applies. Inspectors can examine any books, documents, or other records found in any place which they have reasonable grounds to believe contain any information relevant to enforcement of the Act. Next. Inspectors can examine any customs entry relating to the goods referred to and take samples of the goods and submit the samples to the Bureau's lab or to a designated test facility for analysis or examination. Inspectors can seize and detain for such time as may be necessary any article by means of which or in relation to which they have reasonable grounds to believe any provision of the Act has been infringed. Next slide, Nikeshi, please. Okay, so terms and conditions of the inspections. The TTBS shall adhere to the principles of impartiality and shall not allow commercial, financial, or other pressures to compromise impartiality. The Bureau shall ensure that all information obtained during the course of its activities remain confidential, except for information that the client makes publicly available. Next slide, please. Right. TTBS shall provide products and services consistent with the requirements of the Standards Act, the Metrology Act, and their respective regulations in order to, 1, improve the quality of products and services produced or used in Trinidad and Tobago, 2, facilitate industrial efficiency and development, 3, improve public and industrial welfare by promoting health and safety, and 4, protect the environment. Next slide, please, Nikeshi. TTBS shall inspect goods within a timely manner after processing documents on the TTBS Link portal. TTBS shall undertake inspection activities impartially in keeping with the inspection body's anti-bribery, anti-corruption policy, and conflicts of interest management policies. The inspection body shall not allow commercial, financial, or other pressures to compromise impartiality. Next slide, please. The importer, the manufacturer, and the agent or the agent, they have responsibilities as well. They have the responsibility of ensuring that any technology, machinery, plant, or material to be inspected by the Bureau's inspection personnel is in a safe environment which pose low level or no risk to the inspection personnel. They need to ensure facilities and or premises where inspections are conducted adhere to the guidelines of the TTBS and or the Occupational Safety and Health Act, the Standards Act, and any other applicable legislation. Next. They need to ensure facilities and or premises have sufficient lighting to allow for clear observation of the goods. They need to ensure that goods are at a location and position that are easily accessible to the inspection personnel. And where applicable, they need to ensure that the requisite labeling and or documentation are available at the time of the inspection. Next slide, please, Nakashi. Importers, manufacturers, and or agents need to refrain from attempting to influence inspection personnel by means of cash, gifts, or other inducements. They need to refrain from threatening inspection personnel with violence or otherwise, and they need to refrain from using abusive language or otherwise acting aggressively towards inspection personnel. During the course of inspection activities, it may become necessary to take samples of relevant items for testing. Testing services may be procured from a subcontracted lab. Where samples of inspection items are taken for testing, items are not to be released for sale until advised by the TTBS. It must be noted that failure to meet and accommodate the aforementioned terms and conditions for inspection will result in the appropriate fines being charged under the Standards Act, Chapter 8203, and its regulations. So let's talk a little now on the inspection and the market surveillance activities. Goods would be held for inspection at premises. TTBS will visit and goods would be inspected. Items will be released for sale when conformance has been determined. Manufactured goods will be inspected at the end of a selected production run, the frequency of which will be determined by the TTBS. ISO 28591 is the sampling procedures method that we would use to do the sampling. Next slide, please, Nikeshi. All right, so this shows you a little on the process. On top, you have the number of days or the time period, and the bottom, the responsible party. So at the point of importation or manufacture of the goods are held at the premises. Within 1 to 2 days, the TTBS inspector will go to the premises and conduct a label assessment. If it is necessary to take samples for testing, they would do so. The label assessment, that's done within a day, according to what the inspector finds. If modification is necessary, he would advise the importer or the manufacturer, and modifications can be done and will be allowed according to what the labeling discrepancy may be. If it was necessary to take samples for testing, the testing may take 3 to 4 working days. Once that report is issued, the inspector will then release the items for sale once it was conforming to the testing, and if it was non-conforming, the items would need to be reshipped or destroyed. Next slide, please, Nikeshi. Benefits of the services of the implementation division. Consumers are entitled to well-designed, safe products that are fit for their intended purpose. Remove and prohibit substandard goods, prevent illegal trading practices, ensure a level playing field, protect the environment, ensure value for money purchases, ensure minimum labeling requirements to empower consumers, educate the public on items covered by compulsory standards, collaborate with other agencies to ensure compliance of goods. I would like to also mention that when the implementation division does market surveillance, the implementation division pays for that initial testing. Any testing further to that, the importer is required to pay. We do, there are products which we would accept accredited test results. We would need to verify the lab is accredited and the test methods are accredited as well. So it may not be always necessary for us to take samples and test it here at our labs. Many of you know Ms. Carla Smith as the head of the prepackaged goods unit. She is currently on vacation. Mr. Glenwood Jones is acting on her behalf for the majority of her leave period. So I would like you all to note his email address here. He's out of the office this week, but he'll be back from Monday. So in case you all need to ask any questions also, you can feel free to email him. And I know, well, my presentation has ended. You all may also have some questions that you may want to ask. Now, my colleague, Ms. Rita Thomas, will also be present to answer some of your questions. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the presentation, and I do apologize for the little glitches that I had. Thanks, Nikeshi.
Thank you, Cherian. So we would now like to move to the open session, and I would like to start with Ramon O'Brien. So Nikeshi, if you could make Ramon a co-host, please, so he can share his screen and give us that information on the label requirements.
I sent an email to Nikisha, I think.
Okay, thanks, Ramon.
Yeah, so that shows the artwork, so maybe she could present it as an example of what we typically would see from the US. It's a personal care sample, but we don't have home care products from the US, but I just use it as a reference sample.
Okay, so Nikeshi, I'm turning it over to you to share your screen. And while Nikeshi shares a screen, I would like to go to some of the questions. So we have a comment from Diana, and then I'll go to Mr. Rostand and Mr. Cumberbatch.
You are seeing my screen, right?
Yes, we're seeing this screen with the example.
Yeah, but it's a little fuzzy, but so
the information is well noted, Mr. O'Brien. So we know that it doesn't have any preceding words, etc. And, just in terms of the product itself, while we provide an example, this type of product would really fall under the purview of Chemistry, Food and Drugs Division, but we note that this substantiates what the comment was. So we will take a look at the issue and make a determination as to what is necessary for our national standard, because these labels are really designed for the US market, and they have to comply with their regulations from different agencies.
Can I just ask a question? So I'm seeing distributed, well, I guess what means distributed by, and then you have a slash, is it POR?
Yeah, this product will also be sold in the Puerto Rico market as well. So Puerto Rico accepts either English or Spanish or bilingual. So in this case, the POR is like for distributed for Unilever.
Oh, okay, so that's
So exactly. So what it basically says, that says Unilever Trumbull, Connecticut, and it gives you that code, area code. And that's essentially what the product would typically have. It doesn't state like the USA, like Connecticut, USA. The only time you see the US is if you look at the website where it says ponds.us. And of course, that is not so that is exactly what you would typically get on those products.
Okay. But it has a contact number as well. Okay, so thank you for that.
Okay, Nikeshi, so I'm going to read one of the questions that came in from Diana, representing PriceSmart, and I would ask Cherian to pull up, we need Cherian's slide on the inspection process. So I'll read the comment from Diana. We as importers want to understand the process for imported items. How will it work? Will TTBS test all the items upon arrival? So Nikeshi, you're going essentially to the process flow slide. So continuing with the comment, or can we continue importing complying with the compulsory standard, and TTBS will take the samples eventually?
Yeah, you hear me? Hello? Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, hold on.
Cherian, would you like to respond to the comments?
It would not be everything that we take in for testing. It depends at that point in time. It would depend on what the item is. If we have experienced previous problems with items such as those, it will be determined. It will be determined at the point of reviewing the document and seeing what was imported, and when we go to do the inspection, according to what we find at that point.
Thank you, Cherian. So I just wanted to jump in here as well. What is presented here is a generic process, or it really depends on what the product is or the product category. So if TTBS has made the determination that further testing is necessary, it would depend on the particular product, the specific product standard, and what is required. So this process flow is really indicative. And in general, this is the process that TTBS would utilize. So I would just ask Diana if you could confirm that this answers the query that you have.
Yes, Narita, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, great. So in terms of the questions, I know Mr. Rostand had some questions, but I just wanted to touch on one of the important questions that came in from Shandal in the chat. May have missed it, but where's TTBS at with the QR codes? And I would just start off saying that we had a lot of internal discussions in terms of the QR code. However, based on the mandate for consumer protection, there's a certain level of information that is required on the label itself for the consumer at the time of purchase. And the QR code can provide additional information that is useful to the consumer, but it is not a mandatory requirement for the products to have the QR code on it. So, Nikeshi, did you want to comment further on the QR code issue?
No, Larita, I think you said everything. So it's up to the manufacturer, importer, or whoever if they want to use a QR code, but that does not negate their responsibility as it relates to the information that is required on the label, right? So you cannot put information that is required for you to be in compliance with the standard on a QR code and not have it on the label. So the QR code it's separate and it's apart from what is required of the standard for the label. So once that's clear.
Thank you, Nikeshi. So just to summarize, we are looking at a physical label that goes on the product in the interest of consumer protection, recognizing that we have a number of different types of consumers, but we do recognize the importance of the QR code, so that may have supplemental information, but it is not a mandatory requirement at this time in the standard. So thank you for that comment. I will go to Mr. Rostand. So Mr. Rostand, you can go ahead with your additional questions, and then we'll go to Mr. Cumberbatch.
All right, thank you. So I'll lower my hand. 2.15, this is in the definitions, where it says rebuilt, reconditioned, refurbished, remanufactured, renewed. Now they're all, what, 5 of those 5 terms have been clumped into one category, and without having to change any of the clauses further along in the standard, I think that in the definitions it may be nice to define each one of these, or maybe I don't know, like rebuilt, reconditioned may be bundled together. But what I will say is that these can mean different things, and to the average consumer, they might not realize there's a difference. So I'll just give a quick example. If you are purchasing, let's say, phones off of the internet, a refurbished phone and a renewed phone are really 2 different things. A refurbished phone is someone's old phone that has been refurbished by the manufacturer or the agent, and made ready for resale. Whereas a renewed phone is not someone's old phone. It is actually like the showroom unit that has been taken and cleaned up and reboxed and for resale. So rather than buying a reconditioned old phone that has been used by a consumer for a number of years, possibly, you are actually buying a phone that has never really been used. It's just been sitting in the showcase in the showroom of a retail outlet, and they've taken it and cleaned it up and reboxed it. It may not be the original box, but in essence, you're getting a new phone that has never been used. So things like that, and I was not aware of that until some time ago. And I can tell you, when it came to my attention, I'm on my second renewed phone, and absolutely no trouble at all. I mean, it's really like getting a brand new phone. So some little things like that, I think, are important for the consumer to understand. And a lot of consumers may not realize there's a difference. They see refurbished, renewed, and same thing, just different language. So I don't know if maybe in the definitions we can have 2.15 A, B, C, and really clearly define the different categories between rebuilt, reconditioned, refurbished, remanufactured, renewed, so for the benefit of the consumer. That's it on that point.
Just to add to what Mr. Ruston is saying, typically with those phones as well, you have what is stated as a factory refurbished. So it basically comes along with a guarantee from the manufacturer who has done the refurbishing on the integrity of the phone. So I don't know if that is something that you might want to see written in your standard, that it states factory refurbished, and it normally comes with a warranty. Maybe the warranty might not. Sometimes you get a full warranty because the factory has done it. Whereas somebody who just states, well, it's refurbished, and it's refurbished by who?
Right.
Thank you for those comments. So we'll take a look at that and look at being more specific in terms of the terms and what they mean.
All right. And can as much as are we going to you want to circulate to the other reps on the committee here, or can I just go through? I have two other definitions I wanted to make a point about.
Mr. Ruston, you can go ahead, and then we will go to Mr. Cumberbatch.
Okay, thank you very much. So 2.18, and I have here, it says goods or parts of goods that have been in service, leased, loaned, or owned, and that are re-entering a market for sale, lease, or use by a second user or an end user. And I'm thinking that there's no need for the word lease here. It can probably say re-entering the market for sale or use by a second user or end user. Because if it is re-entering the market for lease, and lease and rental is the same thing, if I am renting a piece of equipment, let's say it's a piece of machinery from, equipment rental company, they are responsible for that piece of equipment, its condition. If I rent it and start to use it and it breaks down, you take it back to the rental company and they'll replace it with another piece for you to use. That's rental. So this is really for used equipment or articles that are coming in for resale or for direct use by an end consumer. This is not for rental purposes. So I don't know if that can be considered. And the last one is 2.21. Sorry, let me get, oh goodness, I'm popping off of the, can you pull 2.21 up on the screen? Sorry.
Okay, so Nakeshi will pull up the standard, so TTS CS 19.
All right, sorry. I'm getting it back here. I'm flicking back and forth, so please excuse me.
No problem, Mr. Rustan. So we can pull up the
Right, so
standard.
2.21, weight. All right. Weight here is only speaking about net weight. And I know this has to do with, it may not be applicable what I'm going to say, because this is really for our local market. But I was just wondering if weight could be split into net weight and gross or shipping weight, because shipping weight can also be very important, especially for goods that are being imported, because the shipping weight may affect the freight charges, which is going to affect your costs, your duties, so I think gross weight or shipping weight is also an important piece of information that should be on a label. And I will stand corrected if persons have opposing views to that. Thank you. And that's it for the definitions.
Thank you, Mr. Rastant. I just wanted to go back to the comment you raised on the second-hand goods. I think the intent of having lease there is so that when the products enter the country and TTBS is looking at the shipment, we would want to do an assessment of the product, especially for the second-hand. So for sale or lease would be like how the product is being, utilized. But when the product comes in, we'd want to have some level of inspection done, especially for the second hand. So I think it was in that context, lease was included. But we are taking the comments on board, and we would relook at it to see if we need to change.
Right. Well, maybe just for a little clarification, maybe I should state it this way. Yeah, if I am bringing in second-hand equipment for resale, yes, I agree. But if I am bringing in second-hand equipment for myself, which I intend to rent to, let's say, contractors, I the rentor, is responsible. It's not as if it's going for resale. And I think, correct me if I'm mistaken, but this labeling standard is goods that are for sale, for wholesale and retail sale.
Well, if we go up to the scope, it says sold, distributed, or used. So, even in the context of second-hand goods being imported for the purpose of rental or lease, we still have an obligation as TTBS to ensure that labeling requirements and safety requirements are met. So the scope is very expansive here. So, but we will take a note of the comment to see if there's any change that we need to make, because the issue of secondhand is a very important one, because, we have a lot of secondhand electronic goods being imported, and some checks will be required by TTBS, and that would be under, say, another part of our labeling standards. But in terms of what the scope is, we have to be very specific here, and sold, distributed, or used. It doesn't go into whether it is for retail sale only. So we have noted that comment.
All right, thank you.
And I just wanted to go back to the other comment raised. This is one on the weight issue and the definition. We would have to look at that definition again in the context of our Metrology Act and be guided by that piece of legislation. This definition was an extract. So that piece of legislation, regulation exists already. Now, what we could look at is also adding some definitions for what is shipping weight, gross weight, etc. So we will take that comment on board, and we'll have a discussion with our Metrology division in terms of their position on this.
Thank you.
Okay, so Ms. Rastan, thank you for your comments. Yes, Nakeshi, go ahead.
Can I just make a point though that the definitions would only be included if it's determined that shipping weight or gross weight is required for as essential information for a label, right? So it's not only about including the definitions, but if there is a determination that those two are essential for the label, then we would look to make some sort of adjustments within the standard. I just wanted to mention, I'm not sure if you wanted to mention the detail when they were talking about electrical products and the labeling, that the TTBS is currently looking at developing a standard that speaks to labeling of electrical items. So
yes, Nkeshi.
Yeah.
So we currently have a number of labeling standards that cover specific products or product categories. One of these standards covers labeling of electrical appliances, primarily for domestic use. What we are doing now is an expansion of that standard to cover a number of different types of electrical products. So I guess in the preliminary part of this session, these two standards are foundational labeling standards, and it influences the range of other labeling standards we have for specific products. So we are currently revising the majority of our compulsory standards to ensure that they're updated. So what we have decided to do, for example, with cleaning chemicals, we are doing an amalgamation of many product standards that we have to make sure that we have a consistent, harmonious approach from a labeling perspective, but also to focus on the health, safety, environmental protection, as well as consumer protection issues in our compulsory standards. So in that vein, we are looking at our electrical appliances labeling standard, and it will be updated and expanded. We are also looking at some of our construction goods to ensure that we have a harmonious approach to labeling as well as the key parameters. So several other consultations will be coming up later in this calendar year. So we are taking note of these comments, especially the one that related to refurbish, renewed, etc., because a lot of the products that we have been seeing in terms of electrical appliances may not be properly labeled, and we want to ensure that we have the maximum coverage needed for consumer protection. So I took a special note of that because it influences our standard, which is out for comment now for electrical appliances. And in terms of some of the other issues, we would need to consult, as I said, with our metrology division to determine what additional changes may be required. But these two standards essentially provide the foundation to how we move forward with the other product categories. So household and automotive cleaning chemicals, electrical appliances, we have labeling of plywood, and the approach that would be taken, and Nkeshi would have explained the level of precedence, where there's a specific product standard, the labeling requirements would take precedence over the other components. So if there's something that covers, say, microwaves, that would take precedence over the labeling of electrical appliances. And if there is no specific product standard or no specific labeling standard for a product category, then prepackaged or general requirements will apply. So it's important to recognize that when we do the very specific parts, there'll be certain modifications that will deal with either the specifics of the product itself or the specifics of the product category. So I think those are some important points we need to keep in mind. So what we would like to do is look at all the comments and address them in a comprehensive way. And on that note, I'd like to turn the session over to Mr. Cumberbatch, who had his hand raised earlier. So Mr. Cumberbatch, if you could raise your concerns.
Hi, good day. It's really a two-part question. In consideration for the inspection of the product, but if it is not in conformance, the goods be placed in a non-conformance area, and if it is, if the product is good, if it's within conformance, do we get some sort of documentation from you guys stating that the goods are ready for sale.
Thank you, Mr. Cumberbatch. So I will turn that question over to Cherian and also Ms. Risa Thomas from the Implementation Division in terms of the outcome of the inspection activities. So Cherian.
Hi, Nadita. Could you repeat the question that you was asking, please? I didn't really hear.
Okay, yes.
Nadita?
You hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the first question was if the goods are not in compliance with the inspection, as you say, it will be shipped back or dumped, right? Or if it is that we are waiting for information or the information from the supplier, is it that we put the goods on in a non-conformance or coordinate off or so? And the second question,
well,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. And the second question is if the goods are released, there's some type of documentation we will get from you guys to say, well, it's okay to sell from now going forward. So.
Sure. So at the point of inspection, if we find nonconformities with the labeling, you are allowed to modify that, right? If it is we take your product for testing and we find that the product did not meet the requirements of the test parameters as outlined in the standard, then we would notify you that the product did not meet the requirements, and you, according to what the item is, according to what the circumstances is there, you may be allowed to reship, or another option is to destroy. Those things are usually dealt with on a case-by-case basis. If it is that the situation is one where you need to provide documentation, well, further documentation from your supplier and so on, and we get that documentation, and let's say, well, your goods are now allowed into the country, onto the market for sale. Yeah, the same way we write up an inspection form when we come to your compound, it's the same way we're going to write up a record of inspection stating that we release these items for sale, and you will have a copy of that. I don't know if that helped in answering you.
Yes, thanks very much.
Thank you, Cherian, and thank you, Mr. Cumberbatch, for the question. So there's another comment from Mr. Rostand. You can go ahead, Mr. Rostand.
Right, thank you. 3.1C3J, which reads, not contain any information by words, pictorial, or other devices which refer to or are suggestive, either directly or indirectly, of another good with such a product, another good with which such a product might be confused, or in such a manner as to lead the purchaser or user to suppose that the good is connected with such other product. So here's my question. When product patents expire and you start to get the generic brands, I mean, I have seen like mouthwash in a drugstore that says comparable to or equivalent to Listerine. What happens in a case like that? Because in that situation, I imagine that it's informing the consumer that this formula, this product, is pretty much the same as Listerine. So isn't that disclosure to the consumer? I mean, assuming that is accurate, assuming that the generic product is comparable, equivalent to the brand name product.
Mr. Rosson, I think that is a very interesting comment. I think it depends on what the label has on it. So once the information is not presented in a way to mislead, so I think that has to be taken on a case-by-case basis, because if we use the example that you presented in Listerine, and it says comparable to Listerine, they're not claiming to be Listerine. But
Right.
there may be examples of other products that are intentionally designed to deceive. So they might just alter a picture or a symbol, and that is where the TTBS inspectors will look carefully at the label and make a determination as to whether the information is accurate, whether there's a level of misrepresentation.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
So, yeah, I think it is a one that we have to assess, because I think once there's a full declaration that the product is what it is, and it is
Right.
not designed to mislead or we have seen examples where they are misleading certification marks, or there might be presentation of a name that is intended to deceive the consumer.
Right.
So this is
right.
where our inspection process and also our certification process is designed to pick those things up.
Right. So this is really not to discourage generic goods, but really counterfeit goods.
Yes, and
Right.
you may have seen some of the notifications in the press that TTBS is part of a illicit trade task force, and
Right.
we're actively supporting that. Or there has been a lot of counterfeiting with tobacco products, personal accessories like bags, but we have to look at where there's a really significant high risk. And this also goes into where we have specific product standards as well, where the product has to be evaluated and determined to be safe. So I think that is a good comment to make. But I don't think we would require any change here, because it gives us a clear indication of what is required. So it's not intended to prohibit or inhibit the importation of generic products, but we have labeling requirements that the consumer has to be aware of, and it is for consumer protection.
Good. Okay. Thank you. That's good. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to invite any other comments, Mr. Rostand. So we'd have addressed yours, but are there any other comments on any particular requirements in the standard or any of the issues that Nikeshi or Cherian would have highlighted earlier?
Yeah, I have a comment a little bit. I know we're not really big on compliance and we're trying to get there, and TTBS is helping that process, but I don't want it to be that we going for the bare minimum. I think we should at least strive for the maximum. It's better to over comply than under comply. Like straight up, that's the rule. And I know we could cut some corners. I know Trinidad Tobago is a work in progress perpetually, but like let's raise the standards. Like it's a little scary, but I think it's a growing curve and we have to raise the standard. We can't just be lackadaisical with everything, especially standards and these kind of things. So I appreciate the TTBS putting this on. I really hope that we can get some, strong legislation, and I know it'll take some growing curves, but I really think it's important. So thank you for putting this on.
Thank you for those sentiments, Chandal. So, as TTBS, when we say that we include minimum requirements for products, it is really a perspective, because what we would normally do is benchmark against the international requirements. So different jurisdictions, the USA, North America, Europe, some of the developing countries as well. We know China is a major manufacturer as well. So we would do our benchmarking exercise, and we look at regulations, because our compulsory standards is really a misnomer as well under the purview of the World Trade Organization technical barriers to trade. What we have to do, though, is to ensure that we have a balance between what is required to protect the consumer, protect the environment, ensure health and safety, versus not making the process more onerous than it has to be. So there are cases where if the product is high risk, we want to ensure a degree of health and safety or environmental protection, but we also want to help facilitate trade and ensure that there's a level of consumer protection. So some of our standards, especially those that are voluntary, are meant to inspire best practices to be used across the country. So we have standards like quality management systems, environmental management systems, business continuity. But where TTBS has a responsibility to regulate, we have to ensure that we have that balance and effect. So we don't want to be more onerous, but we want to ensure that we do have that development of the country and the society. So we appreciate your comment.
No problem.
So I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I believe that we would have addressed all of them. And I'm not seeing any hands raised. So if there are any additional questions, please raise your hands and we'll turn it over to you. But I would like to thank everyone for their participation. This is our second session, and we have taken the opportunity to review some of the comments received, and we have received some additional feedback from participants today, and we appreciate all the feedback. What we will do internally at the TTBS is review the comments and see what additional updates are necessary. And what we will do next, we will not be having an additional stakeholder comment, but as part of improving our process, what we will do is look at the comments received and ensure that we have a comment disposition. In terms of regulations, this is a technical regulation under the TBT agreement, as I indicated before. So TTBS is responsible for the finalization, and we would also have to strive for that balance and effect I mentioned earlier. The Minister of Trade is subsequently responsible for conferring the compulsory status. So what we are looking at is ensuring that the participants and interested stakeholders have a full view of the comments received, the perspectives from TTBS, and we will seek to finalize the standard. In terms of our next steps, Nikeshi will be reviewing the comments. If there's any additional feedback, I would like to, maybe suggest that any additional feedback be submitted to TTBS in writing by the 17th of June. And this will allow us to have a very comprehensive review of the standards. And we will seek to finalize in July, August, time permitting, and based on the feedback received. The next step after that will be for our TTBS board to review and approve the standard, and then we will submit the documentation to the Ministry of Trade and Industry so that the compulsory standards order will be produced. And this is what gives TTBS the responsibility to enforce. After that, it is the primary conformity assessment division that will take up the responsibility for the enforcement. And in this case, we have the implementation division being that primary division. They would host a rollout session, and they would normally announce a transitionary period to allow all stakeholders, manufacturers, importers, distributors to come into compliance. And that will essentially complete the process for the enforcement of these two very important standards for the TTBS. So on that note, I would like to thank everyone and draw to your attention that we have a feedback form that we would appreciate if you could complete it. Basically deals with the events and identify any potential for the enforcement. And if Rodney is still available, I would invite him to give the last remarks as our acting ED, and we'll seek to close the session.
Thanks very much, Nadita. So I think it was a very good session today. I would like to thank the participants who were able to make the time to come and participate, but more than that, give your comments on the requirements of the draft standards. I know that the standardization division has taken a record of all of it and will be looking at each and every one of those comments. So thank you all very much, and back over to you, Nadita.
Okay, so thank you, Rodney. I appreciate your support for the event, and I appreciate all the valuable comments received from the stakeholders. In particular, Mr. Rustant has given us a lot of feedback, and that is really well appreciated. And we appreciate the support received from the other participants in terms of supporting the mandate of the TTBS. I'd like to thank the standardization team, Nakeshi, implementation, Cherian, and her presentation today, giving us that overview, and all the members of the TTBS team that have supported the effort. So on that note, we would seek to conclude today's session, and I would have included my email address. Nakeshi has the email addresses on the screen. So if you have any additional concerns, please write us. So the primary contact points would be the standardization division, as we charge with the responsibility of finalizing the standard. And as I indicated, the next stakeholder engagement will be hosted by the implementation division in terms of the rollout. So we are approximately, I don't want to give a firm commitment on time, but we are probably looking at early next year for a rollout, and the implementation division will guide us on that moratorium period, and that is normally announced in the daily newspaper as well as the TTBS social media. And when we have completed the compulsory standards development process, the documents will be available for download, and we will notify the stakeholders who would have participated in the session today, as well as our previous stakeholder sessions. So again, thank you for your time today. It is truly appreciated, and we will be in touch. So please let us know if there are any additional comments or issues of concern, and we will seek to address it as far as we can within the confines of our Standards Act and the practicalities of enforcing our compulsory standards. So thank you again. Bye.
If I may, on behalf of TTCSI and myself, thank you again for inviting us to be part of this process. Everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Mr. Rosland. We appreciate TTCI's support and your support as well.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan John. We appreciate your support as well from the Consumer Affairs Division.
Yeah, I was very quiet because I was not able to read the standards, so I didn't have much to contribute. But what I heard so far, everything was seemed to be in place for consumer protection. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan John. So we can contact you separately to ensure that you have full visibility for the standards as well.
Okay, then. Thank you, and have
great.
a good evening.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.